Thing that you're looking at here is pretty much standard with the 650 right out of the box, except for the Dillon standoffs to the left there. Those are an added extra. Going through, and I've realized I don't actually have the slide rail for that, but that's alright, I'll make do until I find it. Unfortunately, when you move a few times, bits always get put in other boxes or not in the box they're supposed to go into, and then you end up having to look for them. But this will be its permanent home, so I'll have plenty of time to sort it out. So let's just quickly go over exactly what's here. Come over here, you've got your main press sitting here. That's your rail, which actually houses the case feeder if you get one. That's the standard drop for your completed rounds. Your powder dropper, your arm for the actual operation, and this is actually a support for the arm, and then the actual brackets that mount it. That's your tool head here. Obviously it has dies in it at the moment. It's currently set up for a 223, and then that's your actual feed bar that sits as standard. If you don't actually have a case feeder, you can actually just drop, a dozen or however many will actually fit in there depending on what you're loading and what conversion kit you run. That's your low primer warning, and that's the actual rod that sits on top of the primers. And then these are your actual, that's your tool head pins, and then your actual casing pins that'll actually hold it in on the tool head. We'll go over this a bit more. It's actually for your powder drop, so that's your powder drop assembly. It'll actually bring it back into line, and we'll go over setting all of that up now. If you have any questions, please feel free to post, and I'll answer them as best I can. Thanks. Okay, we'll just go through some of the basic setups. We'll get some of this stuff out of the way. These are actually designed to be mounted on the edge of a bench or a table or something like that. Pretty much anything as long as it's got a straight edge. If you don't have a straight edge, or you can't mount it on the edge of the actual table, then that's where these brackets come in handy. If you've watched my other video on the 550, you'll see how to easily set these up. These actually mount to the bottom as if you're actually mounting it to the bench. These actually have a straight edge, so if you are mounting it to the bench, you can pretty much just mount it straight there. The only thing that you actually have to monitor when you're actually mounting it to the bench is the throw of the actual bar, because you could actually just hit that when you're trying to bring it up, and if it hits that when you go forward on your actual press to seat the primer. Okay, not too sure which point we dropped out. Had some issues with the camera. As I was saying before, I'll have to look back and see what you actually got. But this is actually designed to be just mounted onto the bench. You got to be careful when you're actually using your arm, your actual actioning arm, because if it's actually too close to the bench, when you actually bring it forward, it'll hit, and then you won't actually get your primer seating correctly, because if you can't get full throw forward, your primer won't seat the correct depth, and then you'll have loading issues, and you don't want to be stuffing around with that. So just set it up correctly the first time and you won't have any dramas. Let's have a look at it. This all needs to be cleaned and oiled and greased properly. As the 550, it's been sitting in my garage for almost a year now because I haven't been able to set it up. But let's go over the correct procedure of setting it up, or at least what I do. Whether or not it's the exact right way to do it, but it's the way I do it, and hopefully I'll help a few people out there. Okay, we'll fit the base plates. They're fairly easy to do. Basically just slide them on there, slide the bolts through. And then just put the actual nuts on. The good thing about all the nuts that you use with Dillon is they're all lock nuts, means they basically got some serrations on the other side, so once they actually get to a point where they're touching, you don't actually need to hold the other side with a spanner or a shifter or something like that. They'll actually just lock in as you tighten it up. With these, I don't actually nip them up until it's sitting on the bench, because that way you can actually find its flattest position and you're not getting any twists or parts that are actually not sitting flat on the ground, on the bench I should say. Just make sure you always use your washers as well. It just takes that bit of extra pressure off the bolts and just spreads out the pressure a bit. And then once you've got that on there and just kind of hand tight, you don't want to actually tighten it up, as I said. bench. Turn it to the orientation you're actually going to set it up. So as I said, this is why if it's too tight, it doesn't actually level out properly. You just want to make sure it levels out. And then you want to take this action bar off, line it up. I'll just do everything hand tight for the initial setup, as I did with the other one. And then now that you've got the base on, you just put the actioning arm on. I'll just do everything up hand tight for the moment. And then once you've actually got that on, just be careful because these ones are actually quite front heavy. And you just want to check the action to make sure you're not going to hit the bench. With the other one, as I said, I actually like to have it so that it's actually about a finger's width under there, so there's no risk of it actually hitting. And then I like to square it up against the bench just to make sure it's nice and square. I normally use bolts to go through and then put decent sized washers or a plate on the other side just to make sure that it's actually nice and firm and doesn't start biting through the timber or whatever you actually mount it to after a while, because you are using something that's actuated. You get a bit of pressure on it, and after a while you can start to pull the screws out or whatever you actually use. So if you use nice big washers on a through bolt, you shouldn't have any dramas in the future. So I'm going to square this up and get it ready. I'll just use screws for the moment as I did for the other one, just to get it in there and show you guys how it actually works, and then I'll go through and do the bolts later. So I'll get this all lined up and then I'll come back to you. Okay, I've got it nice and lined up exactly where I want it. And as I said, I'm just using screws for the moment just to hold it in place. And then I'm going to put bolts into it to hold it exactly where I want it. And the benefit of doing it with screws first, just to get it all set up, is that your holes are exactly where you want it. Then you can actually just undo one screw, drill your hole, put the bolt through, fix it up nice and tight, and then that way you do one at a time and nothing has to move. So it's just a good way to actually set it all up and make sure it's exactly how you want. And then you can change it, put the permanent fixtures in afterwards. Okay, so now that's on there, we get a nice throw on there. As I said before, just make sure you can see it. I like to have at least a finger length. In this case, because there's a bit more movement in these ones, I like to have a bit more. Don't like chances of hitting the bench and messing up throws and things like that. This is the basic, just ready to go with nothing on it now. Again, with the other one, I've already got the shell plate and everything fit because it was being used before. This one's currently set up to 223, which can be a real pain to reload. If you've ever tried to reload 223s, you probably know, especially when it comes to actually pouring powder and things like that. You're better off doing it by hand in some cases, unfortunately. But let's go over a few things. Okay, the order in which you do things is really up to you and what you're most comfortable with. I usually put the bar in next, it just sits in the slot down here. And then you'll actually find these bolts here that actually have like a U-bracket on it to actually hold it through. It only goes on one way, so you don't have to worry too much about getting it wrong. It's got the little U-brackets on one side that slots onto the press, and then these actually go into the other side, and it basically just clamps it into position. Apologies if the footage isn't very good. With the other video I used an old handy cam that I had laying around. It wasn't very good, and now I'm using my phone with a little bracket just holding on to it. So just do these up by hand. Obviously when you're setting it up properly yourself, you want to make sure everything's nice and nipped up and tight. Just make sure everything's in the right position. Sometimes it's great to set it all up loosely by hand and then go over it afterwards and nip everything up. Just make sure you don't miss anything, because you don't want things rattling loose or breaking because something's not tight. In most cases it's pretty safe though. Okay, that's the tool head. That just slides in. Typically speaking, you wouldn't have any dies in it yet, but because I had it previously set up, as I said, those are your tool head pins. They just slot in. and then these are your tool head pins for the actual hold the casings in as it goes around. Your shell plate, I should say. Okay. Now the other plate that I have actually mounts onto here. If I was still using the original, it would actually mount on like that. But because I'm not using the original, I'm not going to mount that. It's pretty much exactly the same as I did on the 550, I'll show you that. But this would actually mount up there like that, and then the holder would actually be right there. It doesn't really matter if you want to use the original because it actually slots in quite well. Come to think of it, I might actually have to use it because I can't remember if the other one had the slide like that. So I'm actually going to have to take that off and put it back on. Okay, one of the things I quickly did because I accidentally forgot to fit it on this one. I forgot that you don't use a second plate for the 650 because you've got the narrow style completed round feeder. So I've actually just quickly loosened those nuts off and then fit the original one, which then that just hangs off of there to catch your completed rounds. So we'll keep going. I'll go into mounting the powder feeder and setting all that up, and then we'll go over actually setting up the case feeder. Okay, setting up the powder system is pretty much the same as all the other ones. It's got these two brackets here that actually loosen off, and then you've got your powder thrower here that has the your powder die that has the bracket there for it to slot in. So you basically just pull that out, make sure it's loose enough for it to come on, and then you just do that up by hand to start with, because you're going to have to fit the powder die rod. I might not be using the exact correct term here, but it's what I call them here. So this is the rod that fits into the powder system, which then slides through here and just locks in. And then you actually want to line that up. That's why I said you always do it by hand first. And then you just want to line that up to make sure it's firm there. Loosen that off a bit, because you don't want it too tight to start with. It's actually meant to see how that actually drops down. It's meant to actually drop that down to collate it all and make sure that it's all back to zero when you actually throw powder. So just wind that down. And then on this arm here, there's a little bracket where your washer sits in. That should just sit in there. And then what you want to do is you want to just actually balance that according to the actual primer seater. You don't want that sitting above it, so you need to actually just wind that up until it's sitting nice. But then you also want to make sure that you have spring left there and it's not pushing hard on there, but it's actually bringing it far enough down. But you actually got some spring pressure there so that it's not actually just jamming it, because after a while it'll just start to break things. So you want to make sure you get the spring on the spring, and it's not actually just crushing it. So once you've got that set up there, you're ready to move on. You just tighten these up. Obviously use Allen keys to finish everything off. Here again, I'll just move that. You've actually got your spent primer catcher, which actually should go the other way, sorry. As I said, it's been a while. And I've always found it to be a bit tight in there. So that just slides in there. You can actually, there's a few places online where you can buy adapters for this that then actually come into a tube and just sit here, which I actually have as well. I had those sent down from the US, and then you can actually get adapters for here as well. Anybody that's used the 650 a few times knows that if you're trying to configure or mucking around to try and get something done right and you're dropping unused primers, this fills up quickly, and before you know it, you've got primers falling on the ground and everything else, which is a huge pain. So there's actually a fix for this, which then brings it into a little tube at the bottom so that you're not losing good primers on the ground and have to go looking for them and find them with a bang. Again, with the spent primers, there's add-ons for that to actually drop it down into a tube, and just look on eBay and all kinds of places. There's really good little fixes and bits and pieces that you can do to improve it. But I've always said that the best thing about reloading is research. It's a hobby within itself, and you really need to do the reading, because there's a lot of things that can go wrong. If you do everything right, it's fairly safe, but accidents still happen, and there'll be that one time that you're not paying attention. pretty easy to pop a primer, especially if something jams up or you're not too sure exactly what's going on. So you just want to be careful with this stuff, especially when you're new at it. But let's keep going. This is your feed tube, which then just slots in up here for whatever you actually set up. As I said before, if you don't actually have the case feeder, you can actually just slot rounds in for whatever you're reloading, but it does mean that you got to keep an eye on it so that you don't run out, because again, if you don't pay attention and you've run out, then you're going to drop an unused primer down. Not the end of the world, but as I said, it's pretty easy for them to slide down a bit too quick and then end up on the floor somewhere. So now this is pretty much set up, except for this little support arm that just comes through here and locks onto there to make sure that it doesn't move. From there you've got your spent primer or your new primer warning alarm. Basically this goes down there and sits at whatever level your primers are at, and when it actually starts to run out, it'll push down here and it'll beep. The battery's dead in that one, but you basically hear this. That's off the 550 there. Okay, to fit the case feeder, all you need to do is pop it straight onto the bar, and then you just need to grab your tube. You want to center that up as best you can. Center your tube, and then just pop that straight in, and that's completely done. All you need to do is there's a fixing screw that goes on the back to tighten that up to make sure it doesn't move. Plug it in, test it. I haven't got it plugged in, obviously. I actually need to change the plug because we have issues in Australia that most things don't actually get supplied with Australian plugs because they're different to the rest of the world. Other than that, this press is complete. Alright, here's the 650 completely set up. Hope I helped a few people out there. I'll make a few videos on actually setting up the dies and how to set up loads and all that kind of stuff later. If you guys have any questions, feel free to comment. Thanks.